Hello, and welcome to Chapter 8. This chapter is Wakefulness and Sleep. So we are going to start off in this video understanding what endogenous rhythms are, how they can be altered, and then we're going to talk about what resets that biological clock and knowing the anatomical location of that biological clock. So first off, what are endogenous cycles? So animals like us have these endogenous cycles, and that's what we'll be talking about today. And in particular, we have a lot of these different endogenous circadian rhythms. So let's break down those words, okay? So what does that word endogenous mean? And it means it comes from within. So what does that term circadian mean? Circadian means that it's something that's naturally occurring on a 24-hour cycle. And what does the word rhythm mean? Something that has rhythm is a repeating type of pattern, right? So here we have something that comes from within that occurs on an approximately 24-hour cycle and repeats itself on that 24-hour cycle. So the definition that we're working with is some sort of internal mechanisms that operate on an approximately 24-hour cycle. So what do you think some of these endogenous cycles might be? What do you think in particular we might be talking about in this chapter? One is, yes, wakefulness and sleep. So some of the others that also think about things that, happen on this 24-hour cycle might be frequency of eating and drinking. We get hungrier at certain times of the day. We get less thirsty at certain times of the day so that we can go to sleep and not have to wake up all the time. Our body temperature. Our body temperature is really in sync with that wakefulness and sleep pattern. Secretion of hormones as well. We'll see that hormones are in this circadian rhythm that also coincide with sleep. And then we also have other hormones that are on different circadian rhythms. Urination. It's nice that we don't, at least healthy young adults, don't have to get up to go to the bathroom all night long. Sensitivity to drugs. That's why sometimes the doctor will tell you to take a drug at a certain time of the day. And then emotional well-being also is even one of these things that has a endogenous circadian rhythm. So these circadian rhythms can differ between people. So that leads to different patterns of wakefulness and alertness. So think about it. How many of you are morning people? I'm definitely not a morning person. How about night owls? Some of us just have a tendency to stay up a little bit later, or we find it a little bit easier to wake up a little bit earlier. These cycles can change as a function of age. And so that's what's demonstrated here in this graph. So here we have the time in the middle of night, time in the middle of sleep cycle on days without any disruption. And here's our age in year. So if you look here on this y-axis, we're looking here at, let's say, a 10-year-old. And we're looking at, let's say, a 10-year-old sleeps about 10 or 11 hours a night. That's about the average amount of sleep that they get. So here we're looking at 3 or 3:30 is the middle of their sleep cycle, which means they're going to bed around 10, getting up around 8. And of course, this is when there's no obligations such as school. Now let's look at a 20-year-old. Here, the middle time of sleep switches between 5 and 5:30. Quite a bit different. And let's say these people are getting the recommended 8 hours of sleep. This means they're going to bed at, say, 1 a.m. and getting up about 9 a.m. And again, this is when there's no other obligations. So think about, for you, a lot of you fall into somewhere in this category, right? How does that coincide with your sleep patterns? And this is natural. So, knowing that this is something that naturally occurs is that the preferred time of staying awake gets later until about 20, and then we see again a dipping. And as you see, older individuals have a pattern that's more similar to children. And there's also a difference between males and females, which is interesting. Okay, so as we said, these internal mechanisms operate on approximately a 24-hour cycle. But in reality, most of our circadian rhythms are a little bit over 24 hours. To be a little bit more precise, the average is going to be 24.15 hours. So if we were stuck in a dark cave and we never knew what time of day it was, we had no clocks, we couldn't see outside, eventually our sleep-wake cycles would go over the 24-hour cycles that we're on now. So what is it? Why do we function on a 24-hour cycle? What happens every 24 hours? Yeah, the sun comes up, right? What causes that sun to come up? The Earth rotates on an axis every 24 hours. And so that's what keeps us on this 24-hour endogenous cycle. Now, how do we reset the biological clock for most of the circadian rhythms? And again, we're really talking about sleep and wakefulness here, but it can apply for other biological clocks as well. So how do we reset our biological clock? What did we say on the last slide? What happens every 24 hours that keeps us functioning on a 24-hour circadian rhythm and not 24.15? Sunlight, yes. All right, so what we call that is a Zeitgeber, okay? And so a Zeitgeber is a stimulus that resets the circadian rhythm. So just to put it all together, what is the Zeitgeber in land animals? What is the primary Zeitgeber in land animals? Sunlight is our primary Zeitgeber. And I don't know if I'm pronouncing that word right, but that's the way I'm going to go with it. All right, now sometimes our circadian rhythms get off and they can be hard to reset. One of these situations is jet lag, okay? So jet lag is basically a disruption of circadian rhythms due to crossing time zones. Most of us have experienced jet lag at one time or another. Have you ever noticed when you're traveling east that it's a little bit harder? And that's because when you're traveling east, when you're traveling this direction, it's called a phase advance. So when we're traveling east, our sleep phases are advanced for the time zone. And so it's harder to go to bed. Think about it. When you're here in New York and you're trying to go to bed, say you're trying to go to bed at a regular 10 o'clock bedtime. What time is it here back in California? 7 o'clock. Is it very easy to go to bed at 7 o'clock in the evening? Probably not. And then again, what happens when you want to wake up for a meeting at 8 a.m.? What time, if it's 8 a.m. in New York, what time is it in California? 5 a.m. Much harder to wake up at 5 a.m. than it is 8 a.m. And so going east, when we're phase advanced, it's a little bit harder. And it says phase advanced down here. However, when we come home, it's a little bit easier. Still may end up jet lag, but it is an easier transition because we're phase delayed. So it's delay. Our circadian rhythms are then delayed when we travel this direction, making it a little bit easier. So now that you know that the Zeitgeber is light, what do you think the best way, if you are, whether you're traveling east or you're traveling west, what's the best way to reset that biological clock? Let's say we're traveling east and we want to adjust our bodies so that we can wake up at 8 a.m. by day 2 and not be tired, and then be able to go to sleep that night at 10 p.m. and not be tired. Light. Get out in the sunlight. First thing in the morning, expose yourself to that bright light, and then later in the evening, when it's time to go to bed, stay away from bright lights. Turn off that TV, turn off those cell phones. That bright light in your face can really disrupt your sleep. So jet lag can result in sleepiness during the day, sleeplessness at night, and then even impaired sleep concentration, because as we'll talk about, sleep is very important in allowing us to think clearly. So what's another condition where that might play havoc with your circadian rhythms? Think about jobs that people might have. And like policemen, firemen, nurses, they have this shift work, right? And so this shift work, basically, even policemen who've been working the night shift for years, or nurses that have been working the night shift for years, they can have trouble sleeping because it's an unnatural time. They're working at night. You want them to sleep during the day. Well, they get off work, they walk outside, they see that bright sunlight. That resets their biological clock. Doesn't matter, they're tired, but and we'll see, has to do with how the sunlight can break down hormones and all these different things that kind of screw them all up. So, so even after years of night shifts, workers may still have trouble sleeping during the day, at least for the needed 7 to 8 hours that they have. Buildings have light, but it's not really enough to reset that biological clock. And then sounds during the day, the light during the day, that all makes it difficult to sleep. So it's really not the best. And then think about certain jobs, like my neighbor down the street, two neighbors actually, they work at refineries, and so they're 2 weeks on night shifts and then 2 weeks on day shifts. So their body never has a chance to even adjust at all.